Okay, let's get started. My name's Jim McCloskey, and this is the first day of Colorado closings. And if you will, go to your fourth section in your big three-ring binder and go to closing number 3. Closing number 3. Now, out of the entire curriculum, most people believe closings is the most challenging of any of the parts of the course. But that's okay. If this is your first day, get it out of the way. There's no right or wrong place to start this course, because you have to take it all anyway. And so again, if you're at test prep closing number 3, is where we are. It's in your fourth section, guys. Your fourth section. So, let's talk about closings a little bit. First of all, in Colorado, of course, we are actually considered practicing law. It's a legal practice of law in Colorado. We're one of the very few states that actually define what we're doing as a legal practice of law. And that was through what's that case that proved that? Conway Bogue. Good, Conway Bogue, yeah. And because of that, we don't have to have attorneys looking over all of our contracts. We don't have to have attorneys present at our closings. And we don't want them there. We don't need attorneys sniffing around everything we do. But the trade-off for that is that we have to take this course, closings. So when we go into a closing, we know what's going on. Only Texas and Colorado are the only 2 states that require closings, which is insane. Every state should have closings. Everything in our industry revolves around closing for the most part, at least when it comes to property sales. And a closing is the high point of our industry. It'll make your week. It'll make your week. Everybody at a closing goes to the closing for one purpose, and that's to make the deal happen. Nobody goes to the closing to kill the deal. That happens before the closing. You get all that squared away, and then you go to closing to make the deal happen. And everybody's in a good mood. Sellers in a good mood. Buyers in a good mood. Brokers in a great mood. Everybody's a happy camper is going to closings, and closings are fun. Closings are fun. Now, I've had some closings. I've had 6 and 7 hour closings. Those aren't a lot of fun. Okay. And just sometimes things go wrong. We're going to find out as we're going through these closings that the lender never has any fees. Whatever fees the lender has, they pass along to the buyer. And the broker never has any fees, at least in a perfect world. I've had to get out my checkbook more than once to make a deal happen. I don't like it, but sometimes you have to do whatever you have to do to make the deal happen. But generally speaking, neither the lender nor the broker has any fees at the actual closing. So, and again, the closing is where all of the money not only transfers, but everybody is made accountable for what's happening that day also. So, let's talk about some of the terms in closings. First of all, we're going to be talking about debits and credits. I've had students who are CPAs who struggle with closings a little bit because it's a little bit different than normal accounting. A little bit different. But generally speaking, you're working your job and they give you a check. That's money coming to you. That's a credit. You write out a check for something and it goes out to pay that bill. That's a debit. Credit is money coming to you. Debits are money going away from you. Credits are good. Debits are bad. One way to look at it, okay? Also, we're going to be going over 9 closings. We're also going to be going over 3 20-question quizzes. So, until you get done with this whole course, expect to be struggling with this. You're going to hear a lot of terms you haven't heard before, but don't get freaked out. We're going to be doing a lot. We're actually on closing number 3 in your big 3-ring binder. Okay. When as we're going through this, to you guys, you're going to think I'm going 1,000 miles an hour. I think I'm going as slow as a snail. Okay, but there's a certain pace that has to be kept to get this done. to get this through. If I were to wait until everybody had it, I wouldn't get past that first closing. It's the repetition in this course that's going to make that happen. Thanks, Rita. Who needs some blank closing sheets? Who else is taking the second time? Monica? Here, why don't you just pass some of those around? Now, if this is your first time, you don't need them. You got plenty. But if you're taking it the second time, do take 6 or 7 of them, as many as you need. Because again, we're going to be going over 9 closings. Now, on these 9 closings, 4 of them are assumptions. We haven't done an assumption in Colorado or the United States, for that matter, since 1990. Remember, before 1990, you didn't have to qualify to assume a loan. What you did is you just essentially paid $46 and just assumed somebody's property, or just assume their property. Like I say, if you haven't taken this as your first time through, I see several people are taking this the second time, which is wonderful. But if you're taking it the first time, you don't need extra closing sheets. Okay, if it's your second time through, you do. So go ahead and grab some. Okay, but again, remember, before 1990, you did not have to qualify to assume a loan, and that's when the early 80s interest rates were 16, 17, 18% on real estate. And the experts said it would never go down below 10% ever again. So much for the experts. But I tell you what, it was tough times starting to make a living in the business at that time. But what happened then is in 1986, President Reagan came up with the biggest tax decrease in the history of this nation. He took a page out of President Kennedy's blueprint book. And President Kennedy in 1961 had the biggest tax decrease in the history of this nation. Then in 1986, Reagan used that prototype to actually have the biggest tax decrease in the history of this nation. He brought it down from a high of 90% down to 25%. And this economy went through the roof because of it. And the income to the government went through the roof. By decreasing taxes, that's how you increase money coming to the government. Increasing taxes slows down an economy. It decreases the money coming into a government. But what happened is that in the early 80s, there weren't a whole lot of new loans going on. You assumed a loan because, again, the interest rates were so high. Then in 1990, what happened is we were able to assume someone's property, but the interest rates went so low. But you had to qualify for it. Before 1990, you didn't have to qualify. Like I say, you paid $46, took over somebody's loan, done deal. Pay the difference between what they owe and what it's worth, but not now. But we're going to start seeing assumptions as the interest rate creeps up, and these 3.5%, 4% loans are there, and when the rate's at 6, 7%, we're going to start seeing some assumptions, but you have to qualify for them. The reason we haven't had any assumptions since 1990 is why would I want to assume your 7% FHA loan when I can get one myself right now for 3.5%, and I don't have to qualify, and I have to qualify for both of them anyway. That's why there essentially has been no assumption since 1990. But we're still going to be doing some assumptive closings because there are definitive debits and credits. Definite debits and credits. For every debit, there's a credit. For every credit, there's a debit. So we're going to be doing 4 of these, and after we get through with these 4, once you start getting used to that, then we're going to change everything around and start doing new loan closings, which is the way they're done today. So, expect these next few hours to be difficult. And when you leave for lunch today, you're probably going to be in a daze. Probably going, what I get myself into? But you're going to be fine. You're going to get this. You're going to get this. Are there any questions before we begin? Then let's get started on closing number 3. If you look on that 4th paragraph where it says on March 20th, non-resident sellers listed their vacant rental property for $167,000. On May 21st, they accepted an offer of $164,000. with a $5,000 earnest money deposit payable to the real estate company, and the property is scheduled to close July 9th. On the upper left-hand corner of your closing statement, put down 7/9, date of proration. See that? I believe it's probably the second line up there on top. It might be some, if your copy's a little bit weak, a little bit off a little bit, pull out your blank ones, guys. And right below that, there's one that's filled out. Don't even look at that one that's filled out. That's going to mess you up. Don't even look at that one that's filled out. Use the blank one. And that's the one we're going to be going over here in class. Now, you need pencils. You need pencils. We have plenty of pencils in the back of the room. Please help yourself. You do need a calculator. You need a calculator and you need a pencil. So please, get that. You don't want to do this in pen. Nobody's that good. Okay. Good morning. Monica, could you help her? Sure, where we're at. Thank you. Okay. So, we have the date of proration. That is the date of the closing. No, it's okay, you're fine. Come on and join us. There's a place right over here in front if you like to. Some people don't like to sit in front. Okay. Should be a seat there somewhere. Okay, now. Now let's talk about what's going on here. We're going to go ahead and work with this first paragraph here. And it says that the property, they accepted an offer for $164,500. On your upper left-hand corner, you can put the date of proration as 7/9. Don't put it down July 9th, put 7/9. 7/9.
Why did you not write July?
You'll find out.
Okay.
Yeah, don't write out July. Just don't, I love it when you're ahead of me, okay? I really do. But I just put down 7/9. And then on line 1 we have the sales price, $164,500. Who's going to be receiving that? Who do we credit that with? The seller, of course. We're going to, on line 1, we're going to credit the seller for $164,500 and debit the buyer. Now also, you might want to get a piece of paper and put it as you're going down that list. Says we're going down this list so you can kind of keep it in a straight line. It might make it a little bit easier for you. So again, $164,500, line 1, we're going to credit the seller, debit the buyer, line 1. Then we have on line 2, let's get all that done, so everybody writing here. Again, line 1, credit seller, debit buyer for $164,500. Who's got a pencil? Who needs one?
Yeah.
Like I said, there's plenty in the back there. I've got some dull ones up here.
I've got a sharpener.
Not great, do you? Okay, here you go. There's some of the back too. Anyway. Okay, so we got line 1 taken care of. Now on line 2 we have the earnest money deposit. The earnest money deposit. Who's holding this money right now? The seller's broker. The seller's broker is typically holding this. Anybody can hold that deposit with the permission of the parties. Question on the state exam, we'll cover that later. But essentially, the buyer's broker took that check with the contract, gave it to the listing broker, and the listing broker then put that check into an escrow account. So what we have to do is we have to debit that broker to get the money out of there, and then credit the buyer to get it back in his hands so he can use it. So on line 2, we're going to credit the buyer $5,000. Credit buyer $5,000 and debit the broker $5,000. We have to take it out of the broker's hand. And on that line, on the broker's debit, put a squiggly line all the way down to the bottom because there'll be nothing else in that line. That way you're not tempted to put anything on that line. So again, a squiggly line underneath that debit to the broker. Now, we also have something called a non-resident seller. Now, in Colorado, if we have a home that's over $100,000 and the people live out of state, then what happens is the state of Colorado will require them to take 2% of the sales price or the entire what's called net sales proceeds, what they're walking away with, whichever is less. One more time. 2% of the entire sales price or the entire amount they're walking away with, which is called the net sales proceeds. And the state of Colorado will require that to be put into an escrow account until the state of Colorado is satisfied that all the taxes have been paid on that property. Then they'll return it to the seller. This could happen 2 or 3 years after the closing. A lot of times the seller's forgotten about it. And so if they don't pay them, a lot of times the seller forgets all about it. So what we're going to call this is the rip-off fee. It's not really a rip-off fee, okay? But, yeah, Tina?
Can you go back and claim that? Like, how would you find out if you got that back?
How would you, well, they're going to send you a check. How would you find out if you got that back was a question. Well, you're going to get a check in the mail, obviously.
But I'm
So,
just saying, if you didn't get the check, can you go back to them and say,
if you didn't get a check, you could go back to the title company.
okay.
Let's talk about this. The title company is the one who's going to be closing our deals for us. And she's a lady. I think all the closings I've had 3 guys. It's a woman. And they are the most professional people in our industry. They'll do 2 or 3 of these a day, 4 or 5 of these a day sometimes. They know these closings better than we ever will. Some brokers do their own closings, and I have no idea why. They have to be some of the most anal people on earth to do their own closings. And remember, anal is short for analytical. It's not a body part. So again, what we're doing is essentially working with this closing agent, this closing representative. And what we're going to find out is that who pays her? The buyer and seller split it. It doesn't even cost us anything as a broker to have this professional sitting here doing all this work for us. We're really spoiled when it comes to this. So again, but if there's an out-of-state seller and the home's in Colorado, they will collect that 2%. They, the state, will collect that 2%. Or 100% of what they're walking away with, whichever is less. Now, if I'm closing on my house today, and after this closing, I'm moving out of state, I'm considered an out-of-state purchaser. And again, they're supposed to take that 2% out.
Say, when you say that again, if you're in the state, you're already a resident, and then
Yes.
you purchase a home, and then you move?
Yes.
You're still,
Yeah, what Jean just asked. I'm closing on this property today, and when I sell my house today, I'm going to be moving out of state. And because of that, they are supposed to get that 2% rip-off fee today. Okay? That's the one they miss a lot of times. Because I'm not going to tell them. If I can help it, but so they're going to have to know that, typically, ahead of time, that they're going to take out that 2% fee. And 2% is considerable. Wow. $300,000 house, that's the average home in Denver right now, is $6,000.
But this is just on investment property. This is
No,
not...
Doug, this is on any property.
Okay.
Yeah, the question was, this is on investment property only. No, Doug, this is on your primary residence.
Okay.
In fact, it's not on investment property. It's only on
Really?
only on single-family homes. Well, 1 to 4 unit homes, for all intents and purposes. Now, if you're an out-of-state seller on a commercial property, they will probably do it also. Okay, so
can they go back? At least, say you sold your home and you left the state, can they go back and claim that later?
can they go back? So the question was, so they spaced it. They made a mistake and didn't collect that 2%. And 6 months later, you get a notice from Colorado saying, send us $6,000. Send them back a note saying, tough luck. Exclamation point. You better believe it. If they don't collect it at closing, they can't get it any other time. You bet. And suppose it shouldn't cost the seller anything to do this, because he's paid in that money into an escrow account. Remember, at closing, the seller's usually going to make you put, excuse me, I should say the lender, not the seller, I misspoke. The lender's going to make you, as the purchaser, put typically 3 months worth of taxes into an escrow account. We're gonna find out that they can't put more than 3 months in there, or they shouldn't. We'll talk about that when we get into the real estate manual part of this. And so again, they should not require more than 3 months, but they're gonna make that purchaser put 3 months of taxes in that escrow account. And then during the course of their ownership, they're gonna be making their payments. What's that called? PITI? What's that stand for? Principal,
taxes.
interest, taxes, and insurance. You're paying 1/12 of your taxes every month too. So that at the end of the year, when your taxes are due, you don't have to worry about it. The money's already there. So let's take this non-resident seller's rip-off fee. We're going to take 2% of the sales price. The sales price, $164,500 times 2%. And yes, you do need a calculator. I got some here. I got some in the back. Please grab one if you need one. And again, 2% of $164,500. What's that come to? $3,290. Let's put that on line 20 for special taxes. And we're going to debit the seller and credit the broker. Debit the seller and credit the broker. Comes to $3,290. 2% of the, not the $167,000 that they listed the property for, but the amount they sold it for. $164,500. And again, debit seller, credit broker. We just talked about how we're going to have this professional from the title company closing these for us. We've got 6 columns. We have 2 for the seller, 2 for the buyer, and 2 for the broker. Above broker, write down the word title. 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 And on the brokers or title companies columns, on the left-hand side next to debit, put in, I-N, in, and to the credit column, put out, in and out, in and out. This is not the broker's column, this is the title company's column, unless you're the broker actually closing your own deals. And so I'm going to be saying debit broker, credit broker. When I say broker, title should pop up in your mind. Not broker, title, bam. So in this case I said we're going to credit the broker. What does that mean? We're going to have a ton of expenses in this credit column, and what those are is money that the title company is going to be sending out after this closing happens. That closing lady shows up with a stack of envelopes about this thick. And after the closing, they're already all addressed, everything. And after the closing, she just puts them all in the envelopes and puts them in the mail, and they go out to whoever gets that expenses, like the attorneys, if there are any, the recording fees with the state, all those other issues. So you're going to have a lot of issues on that credit column for the broker, but that's not a credit column. That's the out column for the title company. Clear as mud? Okay, as we practice this, as we go through this, lights will be coming on, hopefully. So, now, second paragraph. The buyers are taking over the seller's existing conventional loan in the approximate balance of $122,000. That's the approximate amount. This is how we do it in real life, guys. We know approximately what these people's home is worth. We know approximately how much they owe on this property right now, but we're not going to be closing for another month or 6 weeks. And so at that point, we'll have the exact figure. Look down at that last, about 6th line from the bottom down there, the bottom of the page where it says, the lender's assumption statement reflects the principal balance remaining of $121,753.43. Everybody see that? Mm-hmm. That's the exact amount. And we're going to put that on line 3. Who's responsible for paying this? The seller, of course. This is how much the seller still owes. So we're going to debit the seller for that amount, $121,753.43. Everybody there? And we're going to credit the buyer. Credit the buyer. This is an assumption. Debit seller, credit buyer on line 3, $121,753.43. We're giving this money to the buyer today because this is an assumption, isn't it? He's got to pay it back, but we're giving it to him today.
Wait, say that again.
Okay, right now, we're going to take this money.
Correct.
Morning, how you doing, Steve? We're going to take this money that the seller is paying off, and we're going to give it to the buyer. We're going to put in the buyer's account. Now, he's got, of course, got to pay it back. He's got to pay it back. We're on closing number 3 here. TJ, get you going? You want to help him out there, Lexi?
Yep.
Cool. Okay. So, that's the exact amount. We know that now. Then it also says the sellers and the sellers have agreed to carry back $12,000 at 10% interest. Now, let's talk about this. First of all, we're closing on July 9th. When is the first loan? When is the first loan payment going to be due on this loan? August 9th, August 10th.
August 1st.
Actually,
September.
September 1st.
On assumption?
On an assumption too, sure. Well, in any of these, why is this? Because interest is always paid in arrears or advance. Which one?
Arrears.
Always in arrears. It's paid after it's due. When we make our payment on, like today is May, we made our payment on May 1st, that was to cover April. That wasn't to cover May. We don't pay in advance, we paid in arrears. Arrears is the opposite of advance. Advance is in advance, arrears is after the fact.
You're saying interest.
Pardon me?
Did you just say
Interest is always paid in arrears. Now, in this part of the course, they say, never say never and never say always. I'm going to be saying always and never 100 times because there are definitives in closings that we're going to have as a consistent variable. So, we're making this payment again for this loan is going to be September 1st, and that covers August. That covers August. And there's no August 1st payment to cover July. Remember closing July 9th? And because of that, we've got to make sure everything evens out for this month of July, or the lender will never be able to collect it. So again, interest always paid in arrears. And the seller is loaning these people $12,000. Does that happen? You better believe it. Often. If you're having trouble getting your people approved, look to the seller for help, guys. Look to the seller for help. That's worth the price of admission today, right there. Look to the seller to make a deal happen if you're having trouble. So again, we have this amount here that we're talking about, and we've got, this is the actual $12,000 that the seller's going to loan the buyer, and it says here, interest for the period of 5 years, and the first payment on this loan will be September 1st. And so on line 4, we just note that the loan's being made. We're going to debit the seller $12,000, and we're going to credit the buyer $12,000. Debit seller, because he's not going to walk away with it today, is he? So again, we're going to debit the seller and credit the buyer, and this is again on line 4. Line 4. Now, let's talk about this. We have an issue here. We've got a problem because there's interest that's owed from today, July 9th, to the end of the month. And if we don't collect that interest today, we're never going to be able to get it. And it's not fair to the seller not to get his interest on that $12,000 he just loaned these people, right? Everybody following this? I can say this again. There's things I'm going to say over the next 3 days 40, 50 times. So please, can you say that again? I'll be glad to. Over and over again. Come out of this clarified of what we're doing. So let's take this interest now, and we're going to actually do what's called a proration. And we're gonna do 100 of these over the next 3 days. And what we have is what's called a timeline. This is it up there on top that's up there. Everybody see that? And what this is, we're going to have a arrears debit advance credit. On the left side, arrears debit. On the right side, advance credit. Like I said, we're going to do 100 of these, guys. And what we're going to do is collect this prepaid interest for this month. Remember I told you interest is always in arrears? There's one exception. And that's for the prepaid interest for the month of closing. And so we're going to...
again?
All interest is paid in arrears, with one exception, and that's for the interest on any loan for the month of closing. For the month of closing. We're going to have to charge this buyer for this interest from, put 7-9, middle of your timeline. On the right-hand side, 7/31, because there's 31 days in July. On the left-hand side, 7/1. Draw your timeline just like that. Draw your timeline just like that. Give you a few seconds to do that. Now, what we're going to do is, again, charge the buyer for this interest from the day to the end of the month. There's 31 days left, or 31 days total, I should say, in July. Do you remember that old poem? 30 days has September, April, June, and November. All the rest have 31 except February, which has 28, and if it's a leap year, 29. You've had your whole life to memorize that. If you haven't memorized it yet, your brain doesn't work that well anymore. You're not going. Don't even try. Don't even try. So what you want to do is put your knuckles together. Put your knuckles together, and your knuckles become the 31-day month. Start with your January on your left hand, your little finger, knuckle, January 31, in between February 28, March, next knuckle, 31, April in between, 30, May, 31, June in between, 30, July, 31, next hand, August, 31, in between September, 30, next knuckle, 31, in between November 30 and then December 31. Get those knuckles out, guys. And
We're all gonna be sitting
I
there.
remember.
you better believe it. And say, oh, I'm embarrassed.
Yeah.
Well, you're going to be real embarrassed if you flunk that state exam because you're too embarrassed to put you cut on your knuckles. Do it. Whatever it takes, guys. Because I tell you what, if you're off by one lousy day, that answer's going to be there. Whether you counted too many days or too few days, that answer's going to be there. So, make sure you do this correctly and get these days 100% correct. What we just calculated here is what's called a calendar year. 365 days in the year. Colorado always uses a calendar year in their prorations. Some states may use a banker's year, which is also known as a statutory year. Statutory year and banker's years mean the same thing. On the state exam, you're going to have prorations on the Colorado portion, you're going to have prorations on the general portion, and you've got to know how to recognize which ones they are. Which ones they are. And you will. You will be an expert at this before you're through. So again, it's a calendar year in Colorado, and also we have to denote who is responsible for the day of closing. Who's responsible for the expenses for the day of closing? In Colorado, the buyer is responsible for the day of closing. We're going to say that buyer owns the day of closing. Now, in some states, the seller's responsible for the day of closing. And in that case, we're going to be saying the seller owns the day of closing. We're going to use the term to the day of closing and through the day of closing to determine whether we're talking about the buyer or seller owning the day of closing. When it's to the date of closing, the buyer owns the day of closing, and we add a day when we're working on the right-hand side. When it's through the day of closing, the seller owns the day of closing, and we add a day when we're working on the left-hand side. I'm going to say that 100 times over the next 3 days. That's the most confusing part of closings, is knowing when to add a day. Now,
But in Colorado, the owner, wait,
no, in Colorado, the buyer owns
Always
the day of
owns
closing.
the
It's
day.
always to the day of closing. And on the state exam, they may not even tell you who owns the day of closing. They may not even tell you it's a calendar year. On the Colorado side, you just got to know it.
okay.
On the general portion, they have to tell us who owns the day of closing. They have to tell us whether it's a calendar year or not.
Okay, but Colorado always owns the day.
Yes. And again, so what we're going to do is what? The buyer owns the day of closing. It's to the day of closing. So we're going to do, put an X on that right-hand side. This timeline tells us what we're doing to the seller. What we're doing to the seller. Remember, it's the seller's property he's selling, right? Everything revolves around the seller. It's his property. And so, whatever we come up with here, we know whatever figure we come up with, we're going to credit the seller and then debit the buyer for that same amount. But this timeline tells us what we're doing to the seller. Now, $12,000 at 10%, how much interest is that per year?
1,200.
$1,200. Right above this left arm here, put 1,200. 1,200 right above that left arm. And now we're going to see how much we're going to charge the buyer from today to the end of the month in this interest that buyer owes the seller for this $12,000 loan. So we're going to have 9 from 31, which is how much? 22. Now, the buyer owns the day of closing, and we're working on the right-hand side. Because of that, we're going to add a day to it. So 22 plus 1, it's actually 23 days, not 22. It's 23, and the formula we're going to use is 23 times the amount we're prorating, $1,200 divided by, is that interest for a month or for a year? It's for a year, divided by 365 days, because this is a calendar year, because we're in Colorado. Now, let's stop right there, and I'm going to say this again 100 times. I expect to, so please say, what was that again? What was that again? We're going to be doing what? This timeline tells us what we're doing to the seller. But the right-hand side is really the buyer's side. The left-hand side is the seller's side. The whole thing is about the seller, okay? But to break it down individually, that's why we have to add a day on the right-hand side. We have to add a day to bring it back to include the day of closing for the buyer. When the seller owns the day of closing, we have to bring it forward to include the seller. Remember, this is the seller side, that's the buyer's side as far as adding a day goes. The buyer's on the right, the seller's on the left as far as adding a day. Do this on your calculator exactly like this. 23 times 1,200 divided by 365. And what do you get?
75.62.
95.62? 75. And I'm trusting you guys. 75.62, is that right? Everybody happy with that? And get your own figures. Don't trust anybody. Nobody's going to be helping you on that state exam, guys. You've got to know how to do these. And so, the 75.62, we knew before we were going to start, we're going to credit who on this? The seller, and then turn around and credit the,
Debit the buyer.
we're going to credit the seller and debit the buyer, and this is going to be on line 29, the interest on the new loan, on line 29. we're going to again credit the seller $75.62, debit the buyer $75.62. Okay. Now, it says that the buyers are to provide a title insurance policy to the seller for a cost of $65. Anytime we have a loan on a property that's going to be sold to the secondary market, who's the secondary market?
Fannie, Freddie.
Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, and Ginnie Mae are the secondary market. And what's going to happen, that lender is going to be selling this loan to the secondary market in many cases, not all the time. We'll talk about when they're not later. But anyway, so we will have two title policies. We'll have the seller's policy, also known as the owner's policy, and then we have also the lender's policy, which is of course always paid for by the buyer because the lender never has any expenses. So right now on line 7, we're going to debit the buyer $65 and credit the broker $65.
What line?
Can you repeat that again?
Again on line 7, we're going to debit the buyer $65 and credit the broker $65. Remember, that's not a credit to the broker, that's the out column. That title lady has a check sitting there for this amount. Now, everybody there? Then we have the buyers, and then we also have the credit report is $90. Let's look at line 30. Whose advantage is it to get the credit report? The buyer. If I can't get credit, I can't get this property, so it's to my advantage. So who's going to pay for this credit report? The buyer. If you're wondering who pays for what, well, who benefits from getting this fee? And in this case, we're going to talk about, again, the credit report on line 30. Debit buyer, credit broker. $90. $90 on line 30. Debit buyer, credit broker. Now, we have taxes. Taxes in the amount of $1823.56 were paid for the previous year. Last year's taxes. Are taxes paid in arrears or in advance in Colorado? They're paid in arrears in Colorado. They're paid after they're due. The taxes for 2015 are going to be due on January 1st. January 1st. But you couldn't pay them on January 1st if you wanted to. It's a holiday to begin with. But they're due in arrears. They're due January 1st. How are they payable in Colorado? In Colorado, we can pay half of the taxes on
15th?
the last day of February, 28th or 29th, and on these prorations, you're never going to have a leap year, by the way. So, it could be paid on the last day of February, and the other half on June 15th. June 15th, half on the last day of February, the other half on June 15th, or one lump sum on April 30th. April 30th, not April 15th, that's IRS, okay? This is taxes on your property. What are those taxes on your property called? What's that Latin term?
Ad valorem.
Ad valorem, according to value.
Sorry,
These are your ad valorem taxes, yes.
or one payment in January.
We can pay our taxes two different ways. We can pay half on the last day of February and the other half on June 15th, or the whole amount on April 30th. So what do? We get our checkbook and write a check for that and send it out? No, the lender does that for us every year because we've been paying into it every year because we've been making, what's that called again? PITI payments, principal, interest, taxes, and insurance payments every month. So that the taxes are in there. So, What
Payment
ha-
interest taxes and what?
principal, interest, taxes, and insurance. PITI, principal, interest, taxes, and insurance. Now, you might have PITI HOA, homeowners associations. PITI HOA PMI. What the heck is PMI?
Private mortgage insurance.
Private mortgage insurance. What type of loan is it if we have PMI?
Conventional.
Conventional loan, and why do we have PMI?
Take the lender on default.
We put down less than 20%. We'll cover this many, many more times in this course. This is the first time you've heard this. Again, we might have PITI, HOA, PMI that we pay in every month. Or we could just have PITI if we don't have a homeowners association and we put down more than 20% on a conventional loan. Conventional loan is a private loan. FHA and VAs are government loans. FHA loans are insured, VA loans are guaranteed. In financing part of this course, we go over that in great detail, because you've got to know how to do those.
I know it's back in finance. Remind me, what kind of insurance is it on an FHA though?
And what kind of insurance
What's
is
the
it on
name
an
of it?
FHA? It's MI, help us out. MIP, Mortgage Insurance Premium.
Okay.
PMI, MIP, same letters just to confuse us, okay? PMI, Private Mortgage Insurance, MIP, Mortgage Insurance Premiums.
So that's for FHA.
FHA is MIP, Mortgage Insurance Premium, where conventional financing is private mortgage insurance. Okay, now, so the seller paid last year's taxes. We're cool. On line 17, on the far left side, just in parentheses, you don't make an adjustment in the columns, just on the far left-hand side, put down 1823.56, and then in parentheses, just put paid. Just put paid.
What line is that, Jim?
Again, 17, line 17, you're gonna put that. That's last year's taxes, and they were paid. After all, this is July 9th of the following year. They should have been paid by, at the very latest, June 15th, right? So they've all been paid, everybody's happy camper on last year's taxes. But now we've got a dilemma. Because we've got this taxes for this year, we're gonna base them on last year's taxes. And come January 1st of next year, this buyer's gonna owe this whole amount, the whole $1,823.56. But, didn't the seller live in this home from January 1st to July 6th? So what we have to do is take the seller's share and give it to the buyer, so that the buyer will have that money in an escrow account when next year's taxes come due for this year. So, let's build our timeline. 1179 in the middle, and on the right-hand side, 1231. Above your left arm, 1823.56, the amount of taxes for that year. Let's get your timeline drawn. How we doing? Are taxes paid in advance or in arrears? Arrears. So we're going to be on this side this time, on the left-hand side. Draw a V here so we know we're talking about from January 1st to July 9th. We're going to collect the seller's share. And we know taxes are paid in arrears. We're going to do what to the figure we get? We're going to debit who? The seller. Because this timeline tells us what we're doing to the seller. So let's add these days up. Get out the old knuckles, and let's go from January 1st to July 9th. How many days in January? February. March. April. 30. May. 31. June. 30. And July? 8.
I thought none.
Pardon me? It's going to be 8 days, because the buyer owns the day of closing. Remember, we don't add a day on the left-hand side when the buyer owns the day of closing, only if the seller owns the day of closing. So 7-1 from 7-9, 1 from 9 is 8. 1 from 9 is 8. We only have 8 days in July because the buyer owns the day of closing, because it's to the day of closing. through the day of closing, the seller owns it. So how many days does that come to? Help me out here.
189.
189. So we draw our diagram here. We have what? 189 times 1823.56 divided by 365. Total number of days in a year. What does that come to?
944 and 25 cents.
944.25. Is that right?
Yeah.
Get it yourself. Don't let anybody do it for you. That is correct. And what are we going to do with that figure? We're going to debit on line 18. We're going to debit the seller. And timelines are always between the buyer and seller. Always between the buyer and seller. We're going to debit the seller and credit the buyer. Because timelines are always between the buyer and the seller. On line 18.
So, just real quick, 17, we didn't put anything in any of the columns, right?
Did you hear that? That was very good.
Right.
Yes. The question was on line 17, we didn't make any adjustments in the columns. Just on the far left-hand side, we just made a note that they were paid for last year. So,
The 944.27, what line did we put that on?
944.25 actually.
25.
944.20. And what if you're off by a few pennies? You're going to be fine.
I was just gonna ask.
But if you're off by a few bucks, you're in trouble. Okay, because that's how close those numbers are. That's how close they are.
Will you always mark that line, put the paid on it, and maybe draw a line through it? or
On line
something?
17?
Yeah.
No. What if the taxes weren't paid for last year? The question is, do we always put the taxes for last year on line 17 and just not make an adjustment? The next closing we do, the taxes, we're going to close on actually April 4th, and the taxes have not been paid yet. So on line 17, we have to do something with last year's taxes. But in this case, they were paid for last year, so we just note on line 17 that they were paid. We don't make any adjustments in the columns. Okay. So we got the taxes taken care of. And again, on line 18, we're going to debit the seller, credit the buyer for $944.25. Now, the sellers have agreed to pay a 6.5% real estate commission. 6.5% of what figure? $164,500 times 6.5% comes to 9870. Is that right?
9,870.
9,870. Is that right?
No.
No, I'm sorry. You know what? I heard 6. I'm sorry.
Uh-oh. She only got 6% commission instead of 6. You're fired. Jane.
It's
You're fired. Sorry.
$10,692.50.
There we go. There we go. Never make
Sorry,
a
my
mistake on
bad.
this figure, guys. Right? So again, how much is it? 6.5% of the sales price, $164,500, and again, it comes out to $10,692.50 on line 37. Who's going to pay this?
The seller.
Seller on line 37. Debit the seller $10,692.50, and we're going to credit the broker. Credit the broker.
So what's the sales? The sales price is 167, right?
No, no,
Or
no.
164.
The sales price is not 167, guys. That was what it was listed for. It sold for 164,500. Don't make that mistake on the
Well,
state
didn't it
exam.
really sell for 169?
Did it sell for 169? What did
With
it
a
say?
$5,000 deposit?
No.
Oh, no.
It comes off of it.
No, they're 5,000. Good try though. No. The question is, didn't it actually sell for 169 because of the $5,000 deposit? No, it said that they accepted an offer for $164,500 with a $5,000 earnest money deposit. So that $5,000 comes off of that. Okay. So everybody got that on line 37. Debit seller $10,692.50. Credit broker $10,692.50. Then it says the buyers have agreed to provide a life insurance policy to the seller for $90 on line 22. On line 22, scratch out hazard insurance. We're not going to use that line. So just put a line through that. and just put down life insurance or life policy. $90. We're going to debit the buyer and credit the broker for $90 on line 22. Everybody there? On line 22.
Credit the broker, debit the
Again, this is this $90 for an insurance policy. Debit the buyer, credit the broker for $90 on line 22. Everybody got that?
Why don't you credit the seller?
Why don't we credit the seller? First of all, this is a lot. Why is this buyer taking out a life insurance policy?
In case they don't pay back the loan. 'cause they
Very
don't
good.
have
This is a
seller
smart
loan the
seller.
money.
Didn't the seller just loan this guy $12,000? He's making him take out a life insurance policy. Pretty smart dude. So if the buyer croaks, just crawls, just falls over dead, the seller's sure to get his money. Smart dude. You don't see life insurance policies in closings very often. But in this case we do, because of this side loan for $12,000. On line 22, debit, buyer, credit, broker. Yeah.
If that were to happen in real life, oftentimes wouldn't that be paid outside of closing, so then there would be no adjustment for it? So like if it popped up here as, that they're buying it, but it's outside of closing, then you're not gonna make any journal entries.
Would this be outside of closing, where it was done ahead of time, so you wouldn't have to collect it at closing? Possibly, it sure could be, but probably not. Probably not. That's probably something that'd probably just be paid at closing.
I don't
It could go either way. What was that?
For the exam, I know the exam's all multiple choice, so how do these closing questions go into play on how they're gonna be in the exam?
Okay, the question was, how do there's 4 answers. You ask you a question, then 4 answers. How's it gonna be handled in the state exam? We're gonna cover that in greater detail when we get into the new loan closings, okay? But on the state exam, you're gonna have, right now, 3 20-question quizzes for closing, 60 questions on closings. That's what those questions are gonna look like on the state exam. Just like those 60 questions. You'll know what I mean. That's how we're gonna discuss it later after we do 1 or 2 of these 20
But you
question
don't have to
quizzes.
do a whole closing like this.
You don't have to do a whole closing on the state exam anymore. We used to have to. And then until about 12 years ago. Yeah, when you took it, did you have to? Yeah, and when I first got my license, I did too.
And if one of your answers is wrong, it throws the whole thing off, so every answer is wrong.
That's exactly right. The statement was if you miss one answer, they're all wrong. And this is how it used to be. And when I took my first state exam, way back when, you had narrative questions too. We had to write a story about how to answer a question. Not anymore. You have this. I took this exam many years ago. It's not any easier now. It's not any harder. It's still a bugger. Still tough. But we don't have to fill out one of these closing statements. We used to have to. And one time I was having lunch with the head of education for the Real Estate Commission. And he and I were buddies. He used to own a real estate college. So it was great having him on the board down there because he knew what issues we had being a school. And at that point, there were actually 45 questions on the Colorado portion of the state exam. And we were talking about this. And, I said, this closing, that's the worst part of the entire exam. Asking students questions on these, and having them fill out a closing statement. And most of the questions had to do with down here at the bottom. At the very bottom. So really they were testing the students on how well they could add. And that's done by computer anyway for closing. So it was kind of ridiculous the way they had it set up. And I made the suggestion, we were sitting there talking, we were throwing figures back and forth. I said, why don't we add about 30 questions to the state exam? So instead of 45, we'll have 75 questions. And instead of having them fill out a closing statement, we'll just ask questions about closings. And we had a talk, probably an hour and a half lunch. And lunch was over, and I went back to work and kind of forgot all about it. And 2 months later, all the schools get a notice that from now on, we're not having to fill out one of these miserable things. And there's going to be 74 questions on the state exam, on the Colorado portion, instead of 45. Now, the glass is half full, guys. It means you can miss more and still pass. Okay? Don't yell at me because I was instrumental in getting from 45 to 74. They couldn't go full 30 questions, some of the state statute. So on the state exam, again, you're going to have 74 questions. And you're going to have several questions about closings. And on the state exam, you're going to, last time I took the state exam, I had 13 prorations. The time before that, I had 3. But you want as many prorations as you can get, because they're your friends, guys. That's an automatic right answer. You've got to know how to do these prorations. If you're not comfortable with prorations, don't even think about going down and taking that state exam. You're going to get your lunch. I had a student last month who came back after taking the state exam. His eyes were about this big. He had 21 prorations on the state exam. Oh, he was all smiles. You kidding?
All right.
You want to get as many as you can. You bet, because you're going to nail every one of those, because you're going to be that good at prorations. Or you're not going to take that state exam. Don't kid yourself. You're going to get your lunch if you go down there and take that state exam and you're not familiar with these prorations.
So what about the general test, closing?
On the general portion, you could have prorations on there too.
But it
you're-
won't be closing like this, it'll
And-
just be proration.
And again, the question is, what about the general portion? Yes, you're going to have just regular 70, just regular questions, 4 choices on the Colorado and on the general. When you take the 3 quizzes we have, you'll be able to understand how the state exam looks in real life much, much more clearly. So, let's keep going here, guys. So, we've got this on line 18. Then we have the real estate commission, 90 days for the life insurance policy, and then we have the new home owners insurance premium, $725. What is this insurance called? It's called hazard insurance. Remember, there's always 2 types of insurance you're going to have on your properties. One's hazard insurance in case it burns down, somebody slips on your walk, whatever. And what's the other type of insurance you're always going to have?
Mortgage insurance.
Title insurance. Title insurance. Sometimes you will have mortgage insurance. But you're always going to have title insurance and hazard insurance. And that's where sellers need us. They need us to sell their homes for them, because they don't even know anything about title insurance. And we talk about title insurance every session. Title insurance next to your deed is the most important part of your transaction, because your title insurance tells you how marketable your property is. If you have a property that's unmarketable, you can't sell it, how much is it worth? Nothing. No matter what you paid for it, it's worthless if you can't resell it. And that's what title insurance does. This is hazard insurance. This is to protect you in case something happens to your property. And hazard insurance, again, is always for 1 year. They're always 1-year policies. And the lender's going to have you pay a 1-year policy plus usually 3 months in escrow also over and above your 1-month policy. So if you get behind your payments, there'll be money in there to pay this insurance, so that if you get behind your payments and it burns down, it'll be covered. So again, this on $725 goes on line 23. We're going to debit the buyer, and credit the broker. Again, line 23, we're going to debit the buyer and credit the broker. This is the out column, remember. Okay, now let's look at the recording fees. Recording fees here, guys. Recording the deed, recording the warranty deed. Line 11, $6. Debit buyer, credit broker, $6. Line 11, debit buyer, credit broker, $6 on line 11. Recording the deed of trust or trust deed. On line 12, $26. Debit buyer, credit broker. On line 12. Everybody got that? 11 and 12. Then we have something called a documentary fee. What the heck? Colorado's the only state that has this thing called a documentary fee. And what a documentary fee is 1/10,000th of the sales price. 1/10,000th of the sales price. 1/10,000th of the sales price. It's 1 penny for every $100 in sales price. 1 penny for every $100. So it's not really an income source for these counties. It's for proper tax assessment. It's called the documentary fee, and every property that sells in Colorado has this documentary fee assessed against it, so that the county knows what the property actually sold for proper tax assessment. The form that they use to report it to the counties is called the TD1000. Boy, write this down, because I just answered 2 questions on the state exam, at least. Again, the documentary fee, 1/10,000th of the sales price, or 1 penny for every $100 of sale price.
Say
And
that
the
again,
form they
say that
use
again.
is called, what's
Can
that?
you say that again? Sorry.
Yeah, again, we have the documentary fee, which is 1/10,000th of the sales price. 1 penny for every $100. 1 penny for every $100. 1/10,000th of the sales price. And the form that's used to report it to the county is called a TD. Transfer document is what it's called. That stands for. TD 1000.
1,000.
TD 1000. 2 questions on the state exam, same answer. What's the purpose of a documentary fee? Proper tax assessment. What's the purpose of a TD 1000? Proper tax assessment. You're going to see one or both those questions on the state exam, guaranteed.
And the form is called a TD 1000, like with a TH, like 1000.
TD
Oh my God.
1000, exactly, is what it is, yeah.
TD 1000.
And you actually fill that out at closings. The brokers, you guys will fill out that TD 1000 at closing. And it's to report what the real property sales price was on that property. Remember, the government considers anything that's ever going to be replaced in that property as personal property. And they expect that TD 1000 to have between 3 and 5% of the sales price personal property. So that's why, if you remember that when you get to the closing, because that's a very confusing document to fill out. It only takes a few minutes to fill out, but you're probably going to be sitting there at the closing by yourself one day and go, dang, I remember in class we talked about that thing. What the heck was it all about? Just subtract out the personal property. And the government expects to see between 3 and 5% of the purchase price of any real property to be personal property. So, documentary fee on line 15, debit buyer, credit broker, $16.45. And that again is on line 15 for the documentary fee. On the state exam, you're going to have a question that's going to be like this. What is the documentary fee on a property that's sold for whatever? Let's say it's $280,000. The way to figure the documentary fee is count 4 decimals over from the right. 1, 2, 3, 4. What is the documentary fee on a $280,000 property? $28. $28. Don't miss that one on the state exam, guys. Miss the tough ones, not the gravy ones. Just move that decimal point over 4 places and you'll have it. Okay. So we have the documentary fee on line 15. On line 16, we have the tax certificate, $15, debit buyer, credit broker. On line 16 for the tax certificate, $15 on line 16 for the tax certificate. Line 16. Line 16, $15. Debit buyer, credit broker. Then we have the seller's attorney's fees. Let's put that on line 8. Scratch out that stuff about an abstract. You okay, Lexi?
Yeah, I'm just counting the decimals over.
Oh, counting the decimals again. Yeah. Make sure you get that one right. And want me to do that again, guys?
Yeah, do that again.
Let's do it again. How much did this house sell for? You tell me. What did it sell for?
280.
Oh, 450,000.
Yeah.
450,000. Okay, let's do it. 450,000. What's the documentary fee?
45.
Count over 4 points. 1, 2, 3. $45.
Oh, that's so easy.
$45. Exactly.
We make it so hard.
I know.
Yeah.
So this is how we're figuring the,
Mill.
Documentary fee.
Look at the mill.
This is how we're
like
figuring.
for the Form TD 1000?
This is how we're figuring out the documentary fee for proper tax assessment. What's the purpose of the TD 1000? Proper tax assessment. Because that's how you report the sales price to the county. You don't do it, we don't do it. The title company does that for us. But we fill out that TD 1000 at the closing table.
And we charge the $45 documentary fee.
And the $45 documentary fee gets charged out of the buyer's proceeds. The buyer pays for that typically. Remember, everything in our industry is negotiable except for one thing. Cost of mediation. You split that 50-50. One more time. Everything in our industry is negotiable except for one thing, the cost of mediation. You split that 50-50. We in contracts we talk about that in great detail. Let's keep rocking here. Then we have the seller's attorney's fees on line 8. Scratch out that abstract. Who's going to pay for the seller's attorney's fees? You better believe it. You pay for your own attorney's fees. I don't even like paying for my attorney's fees, let alone somebody else's, right? So again, on line 8, we're going to debit the seller, credit the broker for $325. On line 9, we have the buyer's attorney's fees, $250. Debit buyer, credit broker on line 9. Scratch out that stuff about abstract. We're not going to use that line. So on line 8, we have the seller's attorney's fees. Line 9, we have the buyer's attorney's fees.
You can do them on the same line and total them.
Pardon me?
You can do them on the same line.
Don't do them on the same
No,
line, because
don't.
they're two different attorneys. Yeah, there's two different attorneys. So do them on separate lines.
Jim, so that was, the 250 was, to, debit the buyer?
Yes, on line 9, the 250 was a question. On line 9, we're gonna debit the buyer 250, credit the broker 250. On line 8, we're gonna debit the seller 325 and credit the broker 325. Okay, now, we have the, down below it, see the bottom of the page now, we got that loan taken care of, the next line, we got the, then we have the tax reserve balance. See that, $759.80? That's how much is still in that tax reserve. Who's this belong to? The seller. So on line 19, we're going to credit the seller and debit the buyer to reimburse this account for $759.80. $759.80 on line 19. Credit seller, debit buyer for $759.80. Line 19. Then we have the insurance reserve on line 24. Who does this belong to?
Seller.
The seller. It belongs to the seller. He's been paying in this every month, hasn't he? PITI, principal, interest, taxes, and insurance. So on line 24, we're going to, again, credit the seller, debit the buyer for $104.16. $104.16 on line 24. Okay, now let's go to the next page. And up on top, we have the actual payment. The principal and interest is $810, taxes $151.96, and insurance $52.80, $52.08. I mean, now, whenever you see the monthly payment like this, put an X through it so you're not tempted to do anything with it. You're going to mess yourself up what you do, mainly because of this. January has 31 days in it. February has 28 days in it. Does that mean my monthly payment for February is less than January? They're the same. So different amounts go toward my loan depending on the month and what day it is. So again, just put an X through that whenever you see a payment. It says the July payment was made, that's good. Then it says the seller's title insurance premium is $675. On line 7, we're going to debit the seller $675 on line 7. Didn't we already debit the buyer $65 for his share? And then we credited the broker $65? Erase that credit to the broker. Erase that credit to the broker, and let's add these. On line 7, it's going to look like this. Debit seller $675, debit buyer $65, credit broker $740. One more time. Line 7 looks like this. We're going to debit the seller $675, debit buyer $65, credit broker $740. We're going to add those together.
Okay, so what happened to the 65?
The 65 is there. We debited the buyer for that 65. We just combined the two of them together.
Oh, okay.
Okay? We just combined the two of them together as a credit to the broker for $740. Add those two together. Then we have a loan assumption fee. What's another word for that? Loan origination fee, transfer fee, whatever they want to call it. This is the lender's charge for making the loan. The lender's charge for making the loan, $1,217.53 on line 35. Who's going to pay? Whose advantage was it to get this loan?
Buyer.
The buyer. So we're going to debit the buyer and credit the broker for $1,217.53. Okay, now we have one more thing we've got to do here. One more thing we've got to do. We have got interest on this loan being assumed. We've got to charge the seller for the days he's in the property. For the days he's in the property. And the way we do this is like this. We take the entire amount that's owed on the property on this assumption, and we charge the seller for his interest that he owes on it.
So we're charging the seller.
We're going to charge the seller for what we're going to be doing right now. So we take that loan amount. Remember on line 3, $121,753.43 times 6.75%. What's that come to?
821836.
821836. Everybody happy with that? I'm trusting you guys. Is that right? So 821836. This is the interest for a year, and this is the only time we divide this number by 12 to get the interest per month. This is Colorado State statute, how they do it. We're going to take this amount, we're going to divide it by 12. And what's that come to?
68486.
684.86. Everybody happy with that? Now, figure it all out, guys. Don't sit there and just piggyback. Make sure you figure these out yourself.
So that's the monthly.
This is the monthly amount of interest on this loan. Nobody's going to be in that exam helping you. You got to figure these out yourself, guys. So, this is the only time we divide by 12, and this is the only interest that's charged on the loan being assumed.
Can you just go over that a little bit, because what did you say, Colorado is the only state?
Colorado's the only state where, when we have an assumption, only on assumption, the new loan you don't have this. But on assumption, we have to charge the seller his share of the interest for the days he's in the house. So we have to prorate this. Let's build our proration. It's going to be from July 1st, right? We're closing on July 9th, and then on this side, 7/31. 7/31. Now, is interest paid in arrears or advance? In arrears. So we're going to be on this side. Up on the upper left-hand corner, we write 684.86. And then we can build our little formula here. We're going to have, first of all, this is what? the interest for just a month. So this is gonna be for 31 days, we know that, 31 days in July. Then we have the amount we're prorating, $684.86. So the only number we're missing is this number right here. Yeah.
Sorry, what's 31?
How many days are in July? The question was
Oh, okay,
what's
just-
31?
Okay, cool.
How many days are in July? And that's 31 days in July. This is how much we're prorating. And what number goes here? We have what? 1 from 9. Do we add a day?
No.
No, we don't add a day because the buyer owns the day of closing. So there's our formula. 8
Okay.
times 684.86 divided by 31.
Okay, explain the buyer owning the day of closing again, because that's so confusing.
I know it is. The buyer owns the day of closing. The buyer's responsible for all the payments on the day of closing. Remember, the buyer is over here, the seller's over here. The whole thing goes to the seller. The whole thing's about the seller. So we're going to break it down on sides. The buyer side's over here, the seller side's over here. When the buyer owns the day of closing, we have to add a day over here to bring it back to the day of closing for the buyer.
How do you know when the buyers own the closing?
How do we know when the buyer owns the day of closing?
Colorado.
Because they will say to the day of closing. If they say through the day of closing, then the seller owns the day of closing. Through the seller owns it, to the buyer owns it. And this is our formula. 8 times 674.86 divided by 31. What's that come to?
176.74.
176.74. Everybody happy with that?
Yes.
That goes on line 6. And what are we going to do with that figure? We knew before we started we were going to debit who?
That one?
The seller, and credit the
Buyer.
buyer, because prorations are always between buyer and seller.
What line is that?
And again, line 6.
6.
Line 6. Okay, guys, let's take a 10-minute break. Let your brains calm down a little bit anyway. Okay, guys, let's do this. Let's go down these lines here. We're going to go down every one of these lines now. None of you have this right. You're going to have some mistakes. And when you're erasing, I want you talking to me, because you're not the only one here who made that mistake. So let's go down these lines. Let's look at the seller's debit column. Everybody there? Seller's debit column. Line 3, $121,753.40. Line 4, $12,000. Line 6, $176.74.
How much?
$176.74 on line 6. What'd you have?
174.
Okay. And then on line 7, $675. Line 8, $125.
Line
325. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, it's 175 without my glasses. So.
Okay.
So 325. 325. Then the next one is on line 18, $944.25. Did anybody have anything between those two?
Yes.
What'd you have?
For line 11,
For line 11,
$6.
she had $6. That's actually on line 11. That's your recording fees. That's a debit to the buyer, not a debit to the seller. That's a debit to the buyer for the recording fee. Okay. So again, line 18, $944.25. Then line 20, $3,290. Line 37, $10,692.50.
Okay, I have something wrong here.
What do you have?
I have a 7562 on 29.
Okay, 7562 on 29. That's actually a credit to the seller. That's the interest on the $12,000 he loaned him. That's a credit to the seller and a debit to the buyer. Credit seller, debit buyer.
The escrow, 5,000
Pardon me?
on number, on line number 2.
Line number 2, the $5,000 escrow account. That's a credit to the buyer, debit to the broker. On line 2 for that $5,000.
On line 20 is 3290.
On line, which line now?
20?
On line 20, let's look at line 20, guys, and that is $3,290. That's a debit to the seller. That's for that rip-off fee, that 2%, right? That's a debit seller, and then credit broker for $3,290. Okay,
32.
Oh, I mean, I meant, I'm sorry.
okay, now, let's go down the seller's credit column. Line 1, $164,500, line 1. And then line 19, $759.80. Anybody have anything between those two? Okay, good, good. Let's go down to line 24, $104.16. Line 29, $75.62.
Sorry.
Yes,
$104.16. Is it like 23 or 24?
that line 20, you're talking about the interest, which should you talk about, I'm sorry?
Hazard.
Well, the hazard insurance, that's on line 24, guys.
Okay.
And that is a credit to the seller for $104.16. This money that he's been paying in all these months, right? PITI, principal interest, taxes, and insurance. Okay, now we have the buyer's debit column. And there's gonna be a lot of numbers in here because the buyer is the one buying the property, right? And we have, first of all, debit on line 1, $164,500. Line 7, $65. Line 9, $250. Line 11, $6. Line 12, $26. Line 15, $16.45. Line 16, $15. Line 19, $759.80.
Wait, did we miss the $15?
$15, no, that's on line 16.
Oh, you got that.
$15, you bet. And then we have on line 22, $90. Line 23, $725. Line 24, $104.16. Then line 29, $75.62. Line 30, $90. Line 35, $1,217.53. How we doing, guys? I didn't see any erasing going on there. Y'all got that, huh? All right. Okay, now if you make a mistake, let's talk about it. Okay? Let's go over to the buyer's credit column. Buyer's credit column, line 2, $5,000. Line 3, $121,753.43. Line 4, $12,000. Line 7, or excuse me, line 6, $176.74. Line 18, $944.25. And that's it in that column. Anybody have anything else?
No survey and credit report.
The survey and credit report is a debit to the what? Buyer, that's a debit to the buyer, yeah, and a credit to the broker. For the survey credit report, if there is one, this one did have the credit report. What's that now?
Tax reserve.
Well, the tax reserves, again, the tax reserve, again, is a debit to the buyer, not a credit to the buyer. The tax reserve, that's on line 19, and that's for the tax reserve, $759.80. That's a debit to the buyer and a credit to the seller. We're giving that money back to the seller. He's been paying in there every month, hasn't he?
Special taxes, 20.
And that special taxes, that's the rip-off fee on line 20. That's for the 2%, and that's on line 20, $3,290.
I think it's credited to the broker.
Yes, again.
Credited.
Okay, that's again. That's the special tax debit seller credit broker for $3,290. Now let's go to the broker's debit column, and that's line 2, $5,000. It's the only one we have in that line. Nothing else. Go play a squiggly line all the way down to the bottom. Nothing in that column. Let's look at the broker's credit column. Line 7, $740. Line 8, $325. Line 9, $250. Line 11, $6. Line 12, $26. Line 15, $16.45. Line 17, or excuse me, 16 is $15. Line 20, $3,290. Line 22, $90. Line 23, $725. Line 30, $90. Line 35, $1,217.53. And,
Or paycheck.
pardon me?
Our
Then the
paycheck.
paycheck. There we go. On line 37, $10,692.50.
On that side, on the 8, that's the total?
On line 8, on the broker's credit,
Yeah,
is that what you're talking about? Line 8?
yeah.
Line 8, of course, is for the seller's attorney's fees, and that's for
325?
$325. Yeah,
Thank
you
you.
pay for your own attorneys. Okay, guys, now, this is the first closing we've done. You guys shouldn't even be close to getting this down yet. You got a long way to go. I will tell you when you should be starting to get this. Okay, so don't get frustrated. We got a long way to go. Let's go to closing number 2. Closing number 2. Closing number 2. Okay. Now look at this, guys. Everybody there, closing number 2? Let's read on the very top of the page, the very top of the page, right below test prep closing number 2, and let's read this. See where it says using the following information. Everybody there? Who's not there? Again, closing number 2, top of the page. Using the following information, prepare the assumption settlement sheet. You may or may not need all of the following information to prepare the worksheet. Now look at this next sentence. Charge the seller to the date of closing. When it's to the date of closing, who owns the date of closing?
Buyer.
The buyer. And what side do you add a date? The right side. One more time. If it's to the day of closing, the buyer is responsible or owns the day of closing, and we add a day when we're on the right-hand side. If it's through the day of closing, the seller owns the day of closing, we add a day when we're on the left-hand side. And we're going to work on some of those, not this next closing, but pretty soon. I'm going to be throwing those at you. We're going to be doing them both ways.
Also, the seller is gonna own a day of closing on this one.
No,
Oh, wait,
no.
closing 2, charge the seller, to
Yeah,
date of
and it
closing.
said, and the statement was, so we're going to charge the seller for the day of closing on this one. No, it's to the day of closing, so the buyer.
Got it.
So let's go to the 4th paragraph here. It says that on February 2nd, the sellers listed their duplex for $275,000 at a 7% commission. On March 5th, they accepted an offer for $269,000 with a reduced commission of 5% and a $5,000 earnest money deposit payable to their broker. The property is scheduled to close on April 4th. So upper left-hand corner, second line, date of proration, 4/4, April 4th, 4/4. Date of proration, 4/4.
Did you say why we don't write April in there?
Did I say why you don't want April in there? You want to think of months in terms of numbers, so that cause we're counting the days, we're counting the days. It helps, we're just using numbers and not using actual names of months. So, line 1, we have the sales price, $269,000, we're gonna credit who? The seller and debit the buyer on line 1 for $269,000. Then we have $5,000 earnest money on line 2. We're going to credit who?
Broker.
The
Buyer.
buyer. We're gonna credit the buyer, give this back to the buyer, and debit the broker. Debit the broker and put a squiggly line all the way down to the bottom. Again, this is for the $5,000 earnest money. We're going to, again, credit buyer, debit broker, put a squiggly line all the way down. Then we have a 5% commission. Let's do the 5% commission. And that's on line 37. Line 37, $13,450. We're going to debit the seller and credit the broker for $13,450. $13,450.
And that's the
This is the commission.
broker fee. So
Right. Whenever I do this, it always blows me away. When I first got started in this business, the typical home was $22,000.
Wow.
If you made $300-400, you were lucky. Now the average price $300,000 is 6% commissions, $18,000. This business has changed a whole bunch. You don't have to sell a whole ton of homes to make a very nice living in real estate. So again, then we have anything else? Anything else in paragraph 1? I don't see any rip-off fee. No out-of-state seller. See anything else we might have missed? I think we're cool. Let's go to paragraph 2. The buyers are taking over the seller's conventional loan in the approximate balance of $249,900. Let's go down to the last paragraph. That'll tell us exactly what it is. It says a lender's assumption statement reflects a principal balance remaining of $250,000. That's on line 3. Who's going to pay this $250,000? The seller. This is how much the seller still owes, right? So on line 3, we're going to debit the seller and credit the buyer. Debit the seller and credit the buyer. As long as we're working on this now, let's go ahead and charge the seller for the daisies in the house. Let's get that out of the way. So we have $250,000 after collection of the April payment. Please collect remit payment to the lender, the amount of $23.19. And so again, we're gonna, if the payment's not received by April 15th, collect an additional 1% of the payment remit to the lender. The interest rate on this loan is 9%. So $250,000 times 9% is how much? 22,500. And what do we do? The only time we do this?
Divided by 12.
Divide it by 12. What's that come to?
1875.
1875, is that right? 1875. Now, let's do our proration on this. 4144,430. We're on this side. Let's build our formula. We have 1875, and this is only for a month, so we divide it by 30. We're just missing this number right here on the left. What number should that be? 1 from 4 is? 3. 3. So there's our formula. 3 times 1875 divided by 30. And what's that come to?
187.50 cents.
$187.50. Let's put that on line 6. What are we going to do with that number? We're going to debit the seller and credit who? the buyer, cause prorations are always between who?
So,
Buyer and seller, buyer and seller, buyer and seller. Prorations are always between buyer and seller. Okay, so we got that out of the way. So let's keep reading here. Real property taxes, the amount of $28.25 have not been paid for the previous year. On this, you're gonna see a question coming at you. Last year's taxes have not been paid, what do? Who's holding these taxes from last year?
the lender.
The lender is. So we're going to ask the lender for instructions. How do they want to pay these taxes? In this case, they're gonna be nice guys and they're gonna say, we're gonna give it to the buyer so we can make a few weeks' interest on it. This is last year's taxes on line 17. We're going to debit the seller and credit the buyer on line 17 for $2,825. $2,825 on line 17, debit seller, credit buyer. Okay, now we have to prorate these taxes for this year.
So we put that 887.50 somewhere?
What's that now?
The 187, where'd it go?
Where's the 187? What are we talking
Where,
about?
the three times, what you just erased.
That was the interest on the assumed.
That's on line 6.
Okay,
That's line 6. We're talking about the interest on the loan
Yeah.
being assumed. That's 187.50. That's on line 6, and that's of course debit seller credit buyer. Everybody got that? Line 6. Okay, now we're going to prorate last year's taxes for this year. So $28.25 up on top here. $28.25 is for the full year. Taxes are paid in arrears. We're going to be on this side, and we're going to charge the seller from January 1st to April 4th. So let's build our formula. We have $28.25 and $365 because the taxes are for a full year. The only number we're missing now is January 1st to April 4th. How many days in January? 31. February? 28. March? 31. And April? 3. 3. 1 from 4 is 3. We add those up, what do they come to? 93. There's our formula. 93 times 28.25, it should be. 28.25 divided by 365.
Okay.
And what's that come to? $719.79. Everybody happy with that?
Yes.
Why don't we just go ahead and round that up to 80? Probably be more accurate. $719.80. We're going to put that on line 18. And what are we going to do with that? We're going to debit the seller and credit the buyer on line 18 for $719.80. Again, debit seller, credit buyer on line 18. Now, it says the buyer will assume the seller's present hazard insurance that was last paid on March 10th of this year in the amount of $804. So the buyer is going to assume the seller's hazard insurance.
Same formula?
And it's what, $804? And it was paid on March 10th. We're going to assume, so it's a 1-year policy. If it's a 1-year policy, what is the last day of coverage over here? 3/9.
Right.
3/9, not 3/10. That'd be a 366-day policy, right? And this was paid in advance, so we're going to be on this side. What are we going to do with any figure we come up with? We're going to credit who?
The seller.
The seller. Everybody see that? This always tells us what we're doing to the seller. We're going to credit the seller and then debit the buyer for whatever we come up with. So, let's build our formula. First of all, we have 804, 365 days, full year policy. Now we're just looking for this number here. We're going to go from here to here. We're going to go from April 4th of this year to April 9th of next year. And don't you dare take a shortcut and figure out what this is and then just subtract it. You're gonna blow the day. You don't know if you're gonna add a day or subtract a day. Do it the right way. Don't take shortcuts. So let's do it. I almost have to figure out a whole year now. 4, how many days in April? 4 from 30 is 26. Do we add a day? Yes, we do. So we have 27 days in April. How many days in May? 31 in May. June? 30. July? 31. August? 31. September? 30. October? 1.
Wait, 31 in October, 30,
Yes.
I was writing November.
That's
sorry.
okay. 31 in October. November? 30. December? 31. January? 31. February? 28. And March? 9.
Oh,
9.
Oh, yeah, oops.
So add all those up. What number goes here?
340, so 9.
How much? How many days is that? 340 days. There's our formula, guys. 340 times 804 divided by 365. And what did you get? 740, 749,
I got 748.93.
Yes.
748.93. Everybody happy with that?
Yeah.
748.93 is correct. Let's put that on line 2. 22, I should say. Line 22, we're going to what? Credit, seller, debit, buyer for $748.93. Again, on line 22, we're going to credit the seller, debit the buyer for $748.93.
And that was hazard insurance?
This is again, this is for the hazard insurance that he's actually assumed.
What line is that? 22?
Again, on line 22. Okay, now, this is a duplex. There's 2 units here. It says Unit 1 is rented January 1st through December 31st. So there's a renter in one of the units. Rent of $1,800 is payable in advance. And the seller has collected a security deposit $850 and last month's rent of $1,800. So this guy put down the first month's rent, last month's rent, and a damage deposit. So, let's figure out the rent first. We got $1,800 is what this guy's paying. This couple, whatever. $1,800. Now, the seller collected this on the 1st, didn't he?
Yes.
For the month, and rent, of course, is always paid in advance, where payments are paid in arrears. Everybody remember that? So, what's going to happen is the seller collected the whole month's worth. He can keep what? He can keep 3 days. Then he doesn't own it anymore. He has to give all the rest back to the buyer, doesn't he? This is the one time we're on this this side over here, and this is a debit to the seller. This is the one time on the right-hand side it's a debit to the seller. He's got to give this back, doesn't he? So, let's build it. Who's lost in what I'm saying here? Everybody understands
Because
that?
it's rent and it's paid.
Yes. And the seller picked up the whole $1,800. We have to take this away from him.
Okay.
So, we have, first of all, we have 1,800, 30 days in April. We're just missing this number over here. 4 from 30 is 26. Do we add a day? Yes, we do. Yes, we do. Because the buyer owns the day of closing. We're on the right-hand side. So, 27 days. 27 times 1,800 divided by 30. $1,640. Everybody happy with that? 1640. Who's not happy with that? Get something different?
I've got 1620.
Yeah, me too.
Oh, I
I got
did.
20 also, yeah.
1620.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was just running my numbers.
1620.
I got 1620.
Now don't do anything with that yet because it says the sellers have occupied unit number 2 and have agreed to rent this unit on a month-to-month basis at $1,750 per month, and they gave a $1,500 security deposit. So the sellers are going to stay in their unit and pay $1,750 per month. Now, they don't have to pay for the first 3 days because they own the place.
Oh, wait, what? Oh, because they own, okay.
Yeah, because they own the place, right?
Yeah.
So we're looking at the same number of days, 27 times 1750 divided by 30. What's that come to? $1,575, $1475, which one's right, guys? 1575. We add that up, what's it come to?
3195.
$31.95. Everybody happy with that?
3190.
$31.95. This is how much the sellers owe the buyer, right? And we're going to do what with that? We're going to put this on the rent. Let's put that down on line 34. Actually, put it on line 33 for the rents. On line 33, we're going to debit the seller $31.95 and credit the buyer $31.95. What's that?
33?
Line 33. Again, we're going to debit the seller, credit the buyer for $3,195. Now we have all these deposits. We'll just lump them together. We have a security deposit $850, prepaid rent of $1,800, and then a deposit of $1,500 by the seller. Let's just add all those three together. So $850 plus $1,800 plus $1,500. What does that come to? $4,150. Let's put that on line 34. $4,150 on line 34. We're going to debit the seller, credit the buyer for $4,150. Debit seller, credit buyer for $4,150.
Online.
Again, line 34. We got the rents on line 33. We have the deposits on line 34. Okay, now we have recording fees. Recording fees. Record the deed, $6, line 11. Debit buyer, credit broker, $6, line 11.
Debit the buyer.
Again, recording the deed, debit buyer, credit broker, $6, line 11. Line 15, documentary fee, debit buyer, credit broker for $26.90. $26.90.
Debit buyer.
It'll be debit buyer, credit broker. Tina, you're too much. You kill me. That's okay. That's the doc fee. How about line 16, the tax certificate? Line 16, debit buyer, credit broker for $20 on line 16. Then, seller's attorney's fees, let's put that on line 8. Scratch out that stuff about an abstract. We're going to debit seller, credit buyer for $250.
Say that again.
Again, seller's attorney's fees on line 8. And again, debit seller, credit broker on line 8 for $250. Line 9, buyer's attorney's fees $200. On line 9, we're going to debit the buyer $200, credit the broker for $200.
I'm sorry, which line was that?
Again, one is line 8, one is line 9.
So
One
line
is
eight,
the s-
it's,
Line 8 is the seller's
Seller.
attorney's fees, line 9 is the buyer's attorney's fees. And then just credit the broker accordingly. Then we have the seller's title insurance, $550. What line's that go on? It's line 7, yeah, line 7. For $550 on line 7.
so that's debit the seller?
And again, debit seller, credit broker, $550. Then the notary fee. Only the grantor signs the deed. Only the grantor signs the deed. And he's going to pay for his own notary fee. Let's put that on line 10. Scratch out that thing about title there. Just put down notary fee, debit seller, credit broker for $4.
Debit.
Again, on line 10, debit seller, credit broker, $4.
Only the grantor signs.
Only the grantor signs the deed. Only the grantor signs the deed of trust. We'll talk about that later on too.
Who is the grantor?
What's that?
The seller is the grantor?
Yeah.
Who's the grantor? Is the grantor, is what? Is the grantor the seller or the buyer?
Seller.
Why don't they just call it the seller then instead of saying the grantor?
Because it could be a trust.
It could be a gift. Whether I'm giving it away or selling it, I'm always the grantor, right? So that's why the grantor, they say grantor instead of seller.
So the grantee.
Grantee is the one receiving the deed. And the grantee does not sign anything. There's not even a place for the grantee to sign. They merely accept the deed. There has to be delivery and acceptance before that property can transfer. And the grantor delivers the deed to the grantee at the closing table. The transfer doesn't happen when the deed is recorded. It happens at that closing table. You walk out of that closing owning that property. There is not one state in the United States that requires that deeds have to be recorded. Because the transfer happens at the closing table when there's been delivery and acceptance. There's a saying in our industry, when you pass the keys, it's a done deal.
Can you repeat about the grantor and the grantee?
Yes, the grantor is the one who is giving the property. The grantor is the one giving the property or selling the property, whatever. The grantor signs the deed. The grantee does not sign the deed. There's not even a place for the grantee to sign. They merely accept the deed. And a question on the state exam. Remember, there's no requirement for being recorded, but when do we have a good presumption that there's been delivery and acceptance? When it has been recorded. One more time. There's no requirement for it to be recorded. But how do we know that there's been delivery and acceptance? When do we have a good presumption of delivery and acceptance? When it has been recorded. Okay? We'll talk about that many more times as we're going through the course. Okay guys, last paragraph here says the lender's assumption statement reflects a principal balance of $250 after collection of the April payment. So the April payment hasn't been made. Please collect and remit the payment to the lender in the amount of $2,319. Who's responsible for this payment? The seller? Who thinks the buyer? Doesn't the buyer own this property now? But
not
what month did that April 1st payment cover? It covers the previous month, doesn't it? So the April 1st payment covers March, and the buyer wasn't even around in March, right? So this is definitely a charge to the seller. $2,319 on line 36. Debit seller, credit broker for $2,319.
Debit seller.
Debit seller, credit broker for $2,319. Yes,
Number 30.
So remit just means
remit
back?
means to pay. The question is, what does remit mean? It means to pay. So we're going to charge the seller for this payment, $2,319. Then they have a rabbit trail. If it's not done by April 15th, we don't care about any of that. And then the interest rate on said loan is 9%. We got that taken care of. Let's go to the next page. You see, what's that?
I'm sorry, don't you have to charge the seller for the 3 days of April that they're in there as well?
Do you have to charge the seller for the 3 days in April? Is there? We already charged them for it.
Oh, you did, okay.
Yeah, remember on line 6, we already charged them for it. So the next,
Gotcha, sorry.
so the top of the next page, we have the payment. We put an X through that, and then we have the tax reserves. The tax reserves, and let's put that on line 19. That belongs to who? The seller.
Seller,
On line 19, so we're going to credit the seller, debit the buyer on line 19 for $3,245. $3,245 on line 19.
I'm sorry, you said credit the seller?
Again, tax reserves. We're going to credit the seller. Why are we crediting the seller?
He already
'Cause-
paid it.
yeah, he's already been paying these every month. You remember PI, principal, interest, taxes, and insurance. So he's been paying this every month, 1/12, hasn't he or she? So on line 19, we give it back to the seller, $3,245. Give it back to the seller, credit the seller, debit the buyer to reimburse that account. Insurance reserve, same thing, belongs to the seller, and that's on line 24. We're going to credit the seller and debit the buyer.
For how much?
On line 24 for $134.
could you say that one time, what are we doing with that?
On line 24, we're going to give this back to the seller, $134. Credit seller, debit buyer for $134. Everybody understand what's going on here? Why we're giving this money back to the seller? He's been paying on this every month, hasn't he? And please collect and remit a loan assumption fee in the amount of $200. Loan assumption fee, heck of a deal. That goes on line 35. Who's going to pay this?
Buyer.
The buyer. We're going to debit the buyer and credit the broker for $200. This is what the lender's charging to make the loan happen. And then we have $100 for a credit report. $100 for a credit report
Debit buyer.
on line
Debit the buyer.
30. On line 30, we're going to debit the buyer, credit the broker for $100 for a credit report.
Debit buyer. Credit broker.
Right.
Which line is that on?
Again, line 30 for that credit report.
Oh gosh.
It's exhausting.
Okay. Now, let's keep going, guys. Let's go to, right after closing 7, you have 3 practice closings, A, B, and C. Go to practice closing B boy. Practice closing B boy. So we're on practice closing B boy. Right after closing 7, you have practice closing A, B, and C. We're on closing B boy. And look at the 4th paragraph. It says on March 20th, the non-resident sellers listed their vacant single-family rental property for $176,000. On May 21st, they accepted an offer for $174,500 with a $5,000 earnest money deposit payable to the real estate company. The property is scheduled to close on July 9th. Upper left-hand corner, 7-9. And then we have the sales price, $174,500. That's a credit to who?
The seller,
the seller, and a debit to the
buyer.
buyer. On line 1, again, credit seller, debit buyer for the purchase price, $174,500. And then, on line 2, we have a $5,000 earnest money deposit. That's a credit buyer, debit broker, and then a squiggly line all the way down to the bottom. That's for the $5,000 earnest money. This is what they put down to take the home off the market. Why do they call it an earnest money deposit?
Other people's money.
To show how sincere you are in buying the property.
Exactly, it shows the seller how earnest the buyers are to buy the property. That's why it's called an earnest money deposit. Then, we have, are we done with paragraph 1?
No, that's special tax.
How about the rip-off fee, the 2%, right? The 2% of the sales price, $174,500 times 2%, which comes to $3,490 on line 20. That's a debit,
To the seller.
debit seller,
Credit broker.
credit broker, debit seller, credit broker. The title company's sending out a check in the morning.
For how much?
Again, $3,490 on line 20, debit seller, credit broker, $3,490.
Rip-off tax.
What's that?
I love that, rip-off tax.
Rip-off fee, that you remember what it is, hopefully. How about the next paragraph? Buyers are taking over seller's existing conventional loan in the approximate balance of $128,000. Let's look down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 lines from the bottom, where it has the actual amount, $126,654.52. Everybody see that?
Mm-hmm.
That is the actual amount that's owed on line 3. Who's going to pay this?
The seller.
The seller. We're going to debit the seller and credit the buyer, because the buyer's assuming this loan, isn't he?
So that's the 126?
That again, $126,654.52. On line 3, debit seller, credit buyer. And it's 6.75%. Let's go ahead and prorate it. Let's get it out of the way. We're going to prorate it.
Who owns the day of closing on this one?
Who owns the day of closing?
Colorado.
Remember, we're in Colorado. If they don't tell us, and they won't on the state exam more times than not, we've got to know that the buyer owns the day of closing, and it's a calendar year. So, let's do this. Let's figure out that we're going to charge the seller for the days he's in the house. $126,654.52 times 6.75%. How much interest is that per year?
8549.18.
49, 18. $8,549.18. I'm trusting you that that's right.
Right.
Is that right?
That's right.
Cool. What do we do with that figure? It's the only time we divide by 12, and that gives us how much? $712.43. This is what? The interest per month. So let's put this up here, $712.43. So let's build our formula down here. We have $712.43, and this is only for 31 days. So the only one we're missing is this figure right here. 1 from 9
And this
is 8. Do we add a day?
No.
No, we don't add
figuring
a day.
interest, right?
Pardon me?
We're figuring interest, is that
This is
what?
the interest, yeah. And so 8 goes in here, right? So what's it come to? 8 times $712.43 divided by 31. 183.85. Everybody happy with that? $183.85. Let's put that on line 6. What are we going to do with that figure? We knew before we started we were going to debit the
The sellers.
the seller,
Credit buyer.
credit the buyer. Good, because prorations are always between
The buyer and the seller.
buyer and the seller.
You said line 33?
And again, no, that's on line 6.
36. Oh,
That's on
line
line 6.
six. Oh, sorry.
Line 6, yeah,
Line 6. Interest on a student letter.
right. Okay. Now, it says the sellers have agreed to carry back $12,000 at 10% interest for a period of 5 years, and the first payment will be on September 1st. So on line 4, we note that the loan was made. On line 4, we're going to debit the seller and credit the buyer for $12,000.
Line 8.
And
Line
$12,000, line 4, debit seller, credit buyer, $12,000. Now we're going to prorate it. We have to prorate this from today till the end of the month. Because the first payment isn't made till September 1st, and that covers what month? If the payment's made September 1st. August. And there's no August payment to cover July. That's why we have to pick up this interest from now till the end of the month. And so, we have 12,000 at 10% interest. How much interest is that per year?
1,200.
1,200 per year. So, let's build our formula. First of all, we have 1,200. And is that the interest for a month or a year?
Year.
So 365. And 9 from 31 is what? 22. Do we add a day? Yes, we do. 23 times 1,200 divided by 365. What do we get? $75.62. Sounds right. Let's put that on line 29. The interest on the new loan. $75.62. We're going to do what with that? We're going to credit who?
Credit seller.
Seller and debit
Debit buyer.
buyer. Okay. Now, it says the buyers are to provide a mortgagee. Who the heck's a mortgagee?
The lender.
The lender, the money is the mortgagee, right? Title policy to the seller for a cost of $65 on line 7. Did it out, Chad? Okay. Get you tomorrow, I guess, huh? Okay. So, we're going to provide a mortgagee title policy. This is a lender's policy. Who always pays the lender's fees? The borrower, yes, the borrower. On line 7, we're going to debit the buyer and credit the broker for $65 on line 7. Then we have a credit report, $90 on line 30. Debit buyer, credit broker on line 30 for $90. Debit buyer, credit broker, $90. Line 30. Then it says, taxes for the current year are to be prorated based on the amount paid for last year. The taxes for last year were paid. So on line 17, we just note the amount and put down in parentheses paid. 1823.56 and put in parentheses paid. 1823.56 on line 17, just paid. Now we prorate them. 18. So again, we got the taxes, 1823.56. Let's build our timeline. It's always going to be from January 1st to 12/31. Our taxes paid in arrears or advance in Colorado. It's in arrears. We're going to be on this side. So, first of all, taxes are for the full year, $365. We know the amount, 1823.56. We're just missing this number of days from January 1st to July 9th. You're on your own. Figure out those days, figure out the whole formula. I want the answer as you're getting it. Lay it on me when you get it. I heard 944, how much? 25 cents. I shut the tape down, guys, those of you who are on disc watching this. I shut it down just so as you're working on the equations. I'm going to be doing that. Once they start giving me answers, I'll turn the tape back on again. So 844.25. Don't trust them. Get your own. A couple of you got that. Who else?
939.
939.26. 939.26. Who else? 949. And how much? Penny? How many pennies? 25. Couple of you got that. Who else?
944.
944.25. Few of you got that one. Who else?
52.
Who needs a minute? Let's do it then. If you need a minute, let me know. Okay, let's figure out here. So how many days do we have? We're going to go from January 1st to July 9th. How many days in January?
31.
31. February?
28.
28. March?
31.
31. April? 30. May? 31. June? 30. July? 8. Only 8. Yeah, we don't add a day. So how many days does that come to? 189. 189 days times 1823.56 divided by 365, and yes, 944.25. Several of you got that. Good. Good deal. So, and we're going to put that on line 18. We're going to do what with that? We're going to debit who?
Debit seller.
Seller and credit buyer. Good. Everybody okay with that? Now, we have a 6.5% real estate commission on 174,500 times 6.5%. What's that come to?
11,342.
$11,342.50, and that goes on line 37. Debit seller,
11,342.
credit broker, again, 11,342.50 on line 37. Debit seller, credit broker. Who's lost on what we just did there? Again, we're getting our commission. We have the sales price, and we're making 6.5%. So again, 174,500 times 6.5%. Then the homeowner's insurance, $725 on line 23. Who's going to pay this? The buyer's going to pay this. This is for the hazard insurance on his property. The seller's not going to pay it. He doesn't. He's out of there. Even if this home burns down tomorrow, he could care less. He's gone. So the buyer's going to pay this on line 23. Debit buyer, credit broker, $725 on line 23. 725. Homeowner's insurance. $725. Debit buyer, credit broker. Then we have the buyer's attorney's fees on line 8. $250. Debit buyer, credit broker for $250. On line 8, line 9, seller's attorney's fees of $325. Debit seller, credit broker for the seller's attorney's fees of $325. Buyer's attorney's fees, seller's attorney's fees. Then we have recording the deed, $6 on line 11. Debit buyer, credit broker, $6 on line 11. It's for the recording fees. Just recording the deed, $6. Debit buyer, credit broker, $6. Line 12, recording the deed of trust for $26. On line 12, debit buyer, credit broker on line 12 for $26. Everybody caught up there? Let's talk about this. What the heck is it? Isn't the deed and the warranty in the deed and the deed of trust the same thing?
No.
What is the difference?
Trust is what the public trustee holds for.
Pretty much. What does the deed do? The deed transfers the
Transfers
property. That's the
ownership.
deed of that's the deed of transfer. Transfers the ownership interest. The deed of trust is what in some states is called a mortgage. Colorado we use deeds of trust. The deed of trust is the property. It's the security for the debt. We give that to the lender to hold as security for the money he lent. So again, the deed is the instrument of transfer. The deed of trust is the actual property. Remember, neither the mortgage nor the deed of trust is the money. If you were to ask 100 people, 99 of them will tell you that the mortgage is the money. No, it's not. The mortgage is the property. And none of us have a mortgage. We gave the property to the lender as security for the debt. And to make it more complicated, in Colorado we don't use mortgages, we use deeds of trust, also known as a trust deed. Same thing. We're going to talk about this so many times in this course. If this is the first time you've heard this, you're looking at me like I'm talking in Greek up here. Believe me, you will get that down. The deed of trust is the property. The deed is the instrument of transfer.
Okay, I'm sorry.
What's that now?
Can you repeat that again?
Yes, the deed of trust is the property itself, which we give to the lender as security for the money that he loaned us. It's the collateral for the loan he gave us. In other states, they call it a mortgage. In Colorado, we call it a deed of trust, where a deed is the piece of paper that transfers the property to us. Two completely different functions. One transfers the property to us, that's the deed. The other one is the deed of trust, which represents the property itself as security for the loan. And what is the money? If the mortgage isn't the money, then what is the money? The promissory note is the money. That's the evidence of the debt. The evidence of the debt is the promissory note. The security for the debt is the deed of trust.
And a deed and trust and mortgage is the same.
Deed of trust and mortgage are not the same, but for the same purpose, though. They're the security for the debt. Why did I correct you, Tina? How many parties are involved in a mortgage?
Two.
The lender and the buyer.
There's two parties involved in a mortgage. What are they called?
Mortgagee, mortgagor.
Mortgagee and mortgagor. Which one's the borrower?
Mortgagor.
The mortgagor. Which one's the lender? The mortgagee. How many parties in a deed of trust?
Three.
Three. Who's the borrower called?
Trustee.
The
Trustor.
trustor. They start the process. The borrower is the trustor. In Colorado, the governor appoints a public trustee in every county except Denver where they're elected. And they hold that deed of trust. They're the trustee. They hold that deed of trust for the benefit of the lender. So we have the borrower, the trustor, the public trustee, and the lender, the beneficiary.
Okay, so you have
Trustor,
the borrower, the trustor, the public trustee.
The borrower is the trustor, the public trustee is the trustee. Almost too easy.
Okay,
And they hold it for the benefit of the lender. So
which
the
is the what?
beneficiary.
Of
The lender's the beneficiary. In every trust, you have to have a trustor, trustee, and beneficiary.
You can have private trustees, right?
Can you have private trustees?
Sure.
You can have a private trustee, but if the lender gives that deed of trust to a private trustee, like a title company, you have to go through foreclosure through judicial action, through the courts. It takes 2 years, about $10,000. So that's why we have within that deed of trust, what's that clause, those of you who've had foreclosures? There's that clause that gives the public trustee
Right, just
the
sale.
power to bypass the courts and start immediate public auction on that property, which is what a foreclosure is. What is that clause called? A power of sale clause within that deed of trust. If you haven't had that yet, don't panic. You're going to have it in the Colorado portion. We go over foreclosures in great detail.
So that's the difference, okay.
That's what now?
That's a question, I know I missed it.
That is a question. Oh yeah, definitely going to be a question on the state exam too. And we'll cover that. We'll cover that. We'll talk about that in several more times. Okay, so let's keep rocking here, guys. So we have the recording of the warranty deed, the recording of the trust deed, and then we have the documentary fee on line 15, $17.45. Debit,
To the buyer,
buyer, credit,
broker,
broker. And how did they come up with that figure? $17.45?
penny per hundred of the sales price.
How much of the sales price?
Penny per hundred.
1 penny for every $100, or 1/10,000. 1/10,000, not 1/1000th, 1/10,000th of the sales price. That's on line 15. Debit buyer, credit broker, $17.45. And then we have the tax certificate on line 16. $15 debit
Buyer,
buyer, credit
broker.
broker for the tax certificate on line 16. Now, we got all that stuff taken care of with the loan. Then we have the tax reserve, $759.80. Tax reserves. That goes on line 19. And who does that belong to?
It's a credit to the seller.
Credit seller, debit
Buyer.
buyer to reimburse that account on line 19. Again, we're going to credit seller, debit buyer on line 19 for that tax reserve. He's been paying into it every month, hasn't he or she or they?
Mm-hmm.
Insurance reserve on line 24. Who's that belong to?
Same thing.
Same thing, it belongs to the seller. We're going to credit the seller and debit the buyer for $104.16.
On which line?
Line 24. It's right after line 23. Then, we have the monthly payment. It's been paid. We're cool. And then it says the July payment was paid. Seller's title insurance premium is $885. Let's put that on line 7. This is the seller's policy or owner's policy for the title insurance on line 7. We're going to debit the seller for $885 and credit the broker for $885. We're going to debit seller, credit broker for $885.
So I need to add
Yeah.
So we need to
65
add
to that.
those, cause we already have something.
And then we have, that's right, we have that $65 already.
On number 5, 7?
7, yes. And so we're going to add those together. We erase that credit to the broker for 65. We're going to debit seller 885, debit buyer 65, credit broker 950. Add those together. One more time. Debit seller 885, debit buyer 65, credit broker 950. Then, loan assumption fee on line 35. This is the lender's profit. Typically 1 point, which is, what is a point?
1%.
1%.
A point is what? It's 1% of the sales price, right?
No.
No. 1% of the loan amount, guys. It's always about the money. And there's 2 types of points. There's a loan origination fee, which is the lender's charge, the cost of him giving you the money. That's what the lender charges is typically, well, there's no typical, 1 point. And then there's another point, which is for discounting, discount rate. And they both cost the same, 1% of the loan amount. 1%, they both cost the same, 2 completely different purposes. One is what the lender's charging to do the loan. The other one is a discount. It drops the interest rate. and they both cost the same, even though they do two completely different things. Again, 1% of the loan amount, discount points and loan origination fees, and yes, you see them continually on all of our deals. You've gotta know what those are, how points work.
When lenders advertise no points, that means
Exactly,
they're
very
putting
good,
it in
very good
somewhere
statement,
else.
very good statement. The statement was, what, on the radio, no origination fees, no origination fees, no closing costs, all these things. Usually if they say no loan origination fees, they build it into the loan somewhere else. Okay? There's no free lunch out there, guys. Come on, we're not that
What
stupid.
part of the loan do they usually build it into, though?
What do they build it into? They can build it into anything. They can have documentary fees, not documentary fees, excuse me. They could have doc fees, just documentation fees, things like this. And they can just, we'll talk about that when we get the new loans.
Okay.
Service fees, things like this, garbage fees, we call them. And we'll get into those later on because there's certain ways we want to handle those. And then again, we have the loan assumption fee, $1,217.53 on line 35.
How much?
$1,217.53 on line 35. That's a debit to the buyer and credit to the broker. Okay. Okay. Well, we've done 3 closings already. You're not supposed to be getting this yet. Not quite yet. Okay, we still have a ways to go. So, let's go ahead and break for lunch, and I'll catch you after lunch.
Quick question real quick.
Okay, guys, let's keep going here. Let's go to closing number 6. Closing number 6. Page 163, if that helps any. Closing number 6. And, 4th paragraph again. The buyer owns the day of closing, calendar year. 4th paragraph. 163, more or less. Here we go. On June 18th, a non-resident seller listed his rental property for sale for $170,000. He finally accepted an offer for $164,500 with the closing scheduled for July 9th. July 9th again. So 7/9, upper left-hand corner, date of proration. Who's lost? Everybody find that okay?
No, I can't even find it. What page is that?
Sorry, so
163 thereabouts. Are you in the right section there?
Pink section. Yeah.
Getting it?
This way here.
Okay. No, you're in the wrong section. You're in the whole wrong section there. Okay, guys.
Except at the same price too, 164.5.
Yeah, this is similar. This way, it's kind of repetition again to get this to happen. It says on June 18th, the non-resident seller listed his rental property for sale for $170,000. He finally accepted an offer for $164,500. Closing scheduled for July 9th, upper left-hand corner. Date of proration, 7/9. 7/9. Then he accepted an offer for $164,500. And that, of course, line 1, that's a credit to who?
The seller.
Seller, and a debit to the
Buyer.
buyer for $164,500. Credit seller, debit buyer. Then we have non-resident seller, the rip-off fee, 2% of $164,500, 2%. And again, we're gonna put that on line 20, $3,290. Line 20, debit seller, credit broker. Debit seller, credit broker.
What line?
Again, line 20, that's for the 2%. Line 20. And it came out to, again, $3,290, debit seller, credit broker.
Spatial taxes?
Yes, special taxes for that. Then, the buyer has agreed to assume the seller's existing loan, which reflects an outstanding loan of approximately $122,000. Approximately that much. If you look at the last paragraph, it says the balance of the seller's loan on the first payment is reflected in an assumption statement as $121,765.34. That's the exact amount on line 3. On line 3. And let's go ahead and charge the seller for the daisies in the house. So, we've got, again, that amount, $121,765.34 times 6.75%. And what does that give us? $8,219.16. Everybody happy with that?
I've got 14 cents.
If you're off a couple pennies, they're no biggie. What do we do with this number? It's the only time we do it.
Divided by 12.
We divide it by 12. And that gives us how much? 684.93. How's that coming about? Everybody happy with that? Yeah, Lexi?
Sorry, how do you know when to divide by 12?
The only time we divide by 12 is the interest on an assumed loan. And the only interest on the loan being assumed is the interest for the seller for the daisies in the property. That's the only time we divide by 12. And 684.93, that sound right? And let's go ahead and do the proration. We're what? Closing on 7.9, 7.1, 7.31. We're on the left side here. We can build our formula here. 31, 684.93, and then we're just missing this number here. How many days is that? 8. One from 9 is 8. So it's 8 times 684.93 divided by 31. Cake. Not too tough. Put that on line 6. What answer did you get? 176.76. And again, put that on line 6. We're going to debit the seller. We knew that before we started, and credit the buyer for that. Now, and then the seller has paid the July 1st payment. The buyer will pay a $7,000 earnest money deposit. On line 2, we're going to credit the buyer and debit the broker $7,000, and then a squiggly line all the way down to the bottom. On line 2, credit buyer, debit seller for $7,000. Then a squiggly line all the way down underneath that debit to the broker. Everybody understand what the earnest money is for? That's to take the home off the market. I want this place. What can I put down to get this home off the market? It's called an earnest money deposit because it shows the seller how earnest you are to buy the property. Then it says the seller has agreed to carry a second loan at $12,000 for 30 years at 10%. Payments are on September 1st. So the $12,000 on line 4, we're going to debit the seller and credit the buyer for $12,000 on line 4 for $12,000. And then we're going to go ahead and we're going to go and charge what? What is this interest called? From now till the end of the month, it's called prepaid interest. Prepaid interest from the day of closing to the end of the month. Is prepaid interest paid in arrears or advance?
Advance.
By its own definition, it's prepaid. It's interest in advance. So So we're on this side. It's $12,000. 10% is $1,200. You're on your own. That's all I'm giving you. Lay it on me when you get it. So far we have $812.90. Somebody else has $75.62. Who else?
$74.19.
How much? $74.19. Who else? So we got 72.32, 75.62, 812.90, 74.19. So let's do our formula. We're going to go, of course, let's build our formula. Is this loan for, is this interest for a month or for a year? For a year, so 365 down here, right? And then 1,200 up here, and how many days? 9 from 31, 22 plus 1 is 23. So 23 times 1,200 divided by 365, and 75.62 is correct. Very good. Several of you got that. And let's put that on line 29. 29, that's the interest on the new loan. Now that's going to be what? Credit who?
Credit seller,
And debit
buyer.
the buyer. Very good. Okay. Now, let's change it. Let's change it. It's always going to be in advance because it's prepaid. So we'll keep it advance. But let's change it to through the day of closing and a banker's year,
Okay.
which means that every month has 30 days in it. Every year has 360 days. So go for it. See if we can figure it out.
Keep guessing.
Okay, so far we've got $30, $70, $73.33, $66, $67. We're all over the place. Who else? What's that?
76.66. Yeah.
$76.66.
That's what I got, 76.
A couple of you got $76.66. Who needs a minute? Well, let's do it. Let's do it.
Hang
Of course,
on.
we're on this side. You need another minute?
Yeah, okay, I'm fine.
I forgot I'm doing wrong.
So, up here we have 1,200. And we're going to multiply it by the number of days. 9 from 30.
That's why I was doing it the other way, shoot.
9 from 30. There's only 30 days in July, isn't there? Every month only has 30 in it. So 9 from 30 is 21. Do we add a day? No. No, because it's through the day of closing. The seller owns the day of closing. We'd only add one if you're on the left-hand side. So 9 from 30 is 21 days. 21 times 1,200 divided by 360. Who got the 70? Good job. Good job. 70 is the answer. And again, that was just practice. Yeah, Lexi?
This is going way back, but I mean, if you're on the left side, you don't technically like subtract, lose a day, you just leave it at the day?
No, no. If you're on the left side, you're always you subtract the day and then add it back in. Where,
Right.
but the other way, again, you always subtract the day, then add it back in. So you can include the day of closing. So let's keep going here. We've got the next part. The buyer will take out a new house insurance policy, and the annual premium is $474.60, and the buyer is to provide the seller with a credit report as per contract. Let's put this on line 23 for the new hazard insurance policy. Again, on line 23, $474.60.
It's debit.
And again, that's the annual, that's debit. Who's going to pay this? The buyer, debit buyer, credit broker. Credit broker. Then you've got last year's taxes, and the amount of $1883.40 has been paid. So on line 17, you just note that they were paid On line 18, we prorate it. So if tax is 1883.40, 1883.40, 1/1/12/31, and you're on your own. Go for it. Okay, so far we got 980.40, 975.24. So have you got that, and 670.80. So let's figure it out here. Which side are we on, left or right? Left side. We're over here, right? And so let's build it. We have 365 days. We know that. It's 1883.40, and we're just missing this figure here. So how many days in January?
31.
31. February?
28.
28. March?
31.
31. April?
30.
30. May?
31.
31. June?
30.
30. July?
8.
8. And what'd that come to?
189.
How many altogether?
189.
189 times 1883.40 divided by 365, and several of you got that. That's fantastic. You're really nailing it. Several of you are. And that's going to go on line 18. We knew before we started we were going to debit the seller and credit the buyer for that. On line 18 for $975.24.
I'm sorry, what line?
Again, that's on line 18.
Debbie?
We're going to debit the seller, and then of course conversely credit the buyer. Okay, then the buyer has agreed to obtain a life insurance policy payable to the seller at a annual premium of $90. And this is the life insurance premium, just like last time, except this time he's going to pay it directly to the seller. So on line 22, we're going to debit the buyer, credit the seller for that $90. Put on line 22. Just scratch out what's on there and put down life insurance, debit buyer, credit seller for $90. Then we've got recording the deed, $6 on line 11. Debit buyer, credit broker, $6 on line 11. Deed of trust on line 12. Debit buyer, credit broker for $26. Documentary fee, line 15, and that's how to get that again?
1,000.
1/10,000th of the sales price. On line 15, debit buyer, credit broker, $16.45. Then we've got the tax certificate, line 16, $20, debit buyer, credit broker for the tax certificate. Seller's attorney's fees on line 8, scratch out that abstract stuff. Debit seller $350, credit broker $350. Then we have buyer's attorney's fees on line 9, $200. Debit buyer $200, credit broker $200. Title insurance on line 7, debit seller $625, credit broker $625. There's no mortgagee's policy.
Sorry, one more time on that line?
On the title insurance on line 7, debit buyer, debit seller, credit broker for the title insurance, $625. Debit seller, credit broker. Then we have a loan assumption fee, loan origination fee, transfer fee, whatever they want to call it. And that's on line 35. This is what the lender charges for doing the loan. That's $1,217.68 on line 35. 35. Again, $1,217.68.
Debit the seller?
We're going to
The buyer?
we're going to debit the buyer, credit the broker for that.
How much is it again?
$1,217.68. Credit report on line 30, $90. Debit buyer, credit broker, $90. Commission, 6.5% of the sales price, 6.5% of $164,500. Ooh, you're quick on that, good. $10,692.30. I know I fired you earlier.
They have
I
50
hired
cents.
you again, you're back on staff. There we go.
I want that 30 cents.
And that's right.
It's a nice paycheck.
That's right. Nice little paycheck, you better believe it. That's on line 37. We're going to debit the seller, credit the broker for $10,692.50. Then,
I said 50 cents.
He said 30 cents.
I said 50. Well, I have 50 cents.
okay. It's on tape.
Yeah,
That's
I
the
was
guy
just
back
saying,
there.
yeah,
We
yeah.
got it.
Right, 30 cents.
Did I say 30?
Let's go to the recall.
Okay, let's keep going here. So then we have the bottom paragraph there says, balance of the loan, we got that. The statement also reflects a tax reserve of $784.75. Line 19, we're going to credit seller and debit the buyer. Give it back to the seller on line 19. That's again $784.75, line 19, credit seller, debit buyer. We have an insurance reserve, and that's on line 24. Line 24, and that again, credit seller, debit buyer for $79.10. And just like that, guys, we finished 4 closings. You feel any smarter, or do you feel dumber? Got a little bit of both? Yeah, this will come. This will come. You're not supposed to be getting this yet. Okay, stop the tape, those of you who are on disc, and go to the next one.